mean, just to start, I would love for you to share a couple sentences about yourself. So, just your background and what are some of the experiences that you're drawing from to inform today's conversation?
Right. Okay. Well, I am John Seeley Brown, often go by the name JSB. uh, and I used to be the director of the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center for many, many years. I stepped down from that about 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago. So I've just been doing odd jobs on the fringe. Um, Being a consultant and on the board of directors of various companies such as Amazon for 14 years, et cetera, Corning, et cetera. Um, but I think that the key to me has always been to to really be able to honor the fact we're growing up in a world of a pace of change, and that most of the things I need to know I didn't get schooled in. Um, and I had to kind of figure it out on the fly, learn it from others, pick it up from the social networks, community networks, and so on and so forth. It's much more kind of a sense of um, learning in the wild. Um, and so I never took schooling very seriously. So even as a young kid, you know, most of my real learning was on a farm or something like that, where the only thing to expect is the unexpected because things never work. And lo and behold, you got to fix them. um, and there's no school book to use. But between that and then my father was a physical chemist, and I used to work as a young kid in his laboratory, so I had access to unbelievable equipment. But then again, um, that was long before anything was being taught. So it was really a question of learning with others, but in action. So it was a whole sense of not thinking of learning through schooling, but thinking about learning more in action. And it's one of the reasons why I've gotten so interested in kind of the new generation, the Z generation, et cetera, is because experiential learning how to read context becomes now more important than ever. And that's one of the things somehow they forgot to teach me in school. Um, although having traveled most of the world, hitchhiking around the world, as one thing you learn is reading context. Otherwise, you're dead. Uh, so when you get into a car, you just made a critical decision, and you also have to learn when something's gone too far. Now you got to find some way to escape, and so on. And if you're in cultures that you know nothing about, you pick up new cues, and it's kind of a sense of learning again in action. And it's something which I believe is incredibly more important than people talk about. It almost never is taught in schools. Um, and, it's my kind of belief that the Gen Z crowd, learns in action, um, often by, a sense of experiential learning with each other or not. And I just think that there's a interesting way that our pace of change today is so great that many of the techniques that some of us learned as a young kid are almost more relevant now than going to school and being taught from a book. Uh, um, and so there's a sense too that there's a that if learning in action can be kind of fun, um, and it's a sense of uh, building a sense of agency. And I think this sense of agency, um, classical schooling forgot. Um, and that kind of the new world we're walking into, agency means more now than ever, perhaps. And the importance of that is, I think, going up because so much of what I'm learning now has to be something that's relatively new in the last maybe 2 to 3 months. Um, or from my work this morning, maybe the last 2 or 3 weeks. um, and so there's a certain sense of trying to, in this kind of whitewater age, whitewater world, how do you really understand how to play the waves correctly, and again, learn that way. Um, and although it can be terrifying, it can also be enjoying. And so part of the catch is to learn how to, achieve a balance between terror and awe. Um, and I think that that's a funny issue. And it often leads to more conversations with folks of your own age that are caught up in the same kind of thing. And, it's just amazing to me that I traveled a good share of the world when I was like 17. And my tutor was a 16-year-old from Germany. And he was so much more experienced in living in the world, in action, that it was tremendous to have him as a colleague as we would experience things, including going to the revolution in Cuba, um, and et cetera, et cetera. These are moderately dangerous things, but it was kind of just interesting to be able to observe from him, how he would probe the situation and from those probes try to piece together. And then we would discuss kind of our conclusions. And it was an amazing, several month learning uh, for me to just be with him. And and yet he was younger, but he'd also traveled a good share of the world. Um,
Mhm.
so it was, fine for me to admit that no, I don't know that language. He said, "What?" Like, uh, uh, but so on and so forth. But it was a fun experience, and that it's interesting that I come back accidentally, but quite often talk about it being a fun experience. Um, and it goes back to more and more what I think of is, how do we accelerate learning in action? Um, and how do you do that safely, but how do you do it collaboratively? Because learning now has to be fundamentally collaborative, um, because you're learning from each other. You're each reading a situation slightly differently, and then you try to collect the different ways that you both, or all of you in this case both, read the situation. And and then I would say, well, you really saw that? How do you get that feeling? And then my 16-year-old tutor, if I was 17 or whatever it was, would explain to me how he read the context. And I said, not bad. But as you now move into the age of AI, this game is changing so fast that that sense of fluidity is more dominant than ever. And learning, therefore, in action with each other, collaborating with each other. And suddenly, kind of, you realize, this whole issue of cheating with AI doesn't occur to many of us because it's really a question of how do you steer the prompting in AI to guide you to, or how do you guide it to zero in on some of the things you're really confused by? Um, and so it's an interactive and it's kind of a partnership that you start to form. And this whole notion of what makes partnership work becomes, I think, more critical than ever. Um, and I think that that's just a key secret to how to really use today's artificial intelligence in a way that's a constant learning and a constant experimenting with from action with a partner, and then how do you start to eventually build a partnership with your AI system that it's helping you or you're helping it, but you kind of it's kind of a relational intelligence. You're listening to how it interpreted you, it's listening to how you interpreted it, and lo and behold, something starts to emerge that can be pretty damn interesting.
Yeah. That's a really interesting thought. And it was so great to hear more of the color from just the experiences that have kind of informed this view about, learning in action, learning in the wild. I'm curious. So I think the prompt that had been shared was, as we're thinking about this AI future or whatever's coming next, what elements of, I guess, an unexpected future could you anticipate in the next 5 years? What might an unexpected future alongside AI look like?
Well, I think an unexpected future may be suddenly seeing this partnership being an incredible learning amplifier.
Mm,
So how are you actually learning at a ferociously new pace? Um, because you're reading context all the time. Much of the meaning comes from the task from that. You're back to not only a tacit knowledge, but maybe even a collective tacit knowledge um, that you and a couple other people would be engaging in as you embark on a new project. And so there's a sense that just because you don't know it, the real question is how do you start to probe it? And what are smart ways to probe? There can be dumb ways to probe, but there can be many smart ways. And you start to pick up hints from each other in how to probe this new situation, um, preferably in moderately safe ways. Going back to my hitchhiking days, that mattered a lot. But but again, it's something that you become aware that look at this is a precarious world. It's changing very fast. There are very few rigid rules that are being necessarily always adhered to, and you learn how to to almost swim in this world. Um, and as you know, I'm a strong believer in the whitewater world. Um, and in the whitewater world, I was a kayaker. You learn to roll with things pretty well, but you also need to learn how to predict things. And you often have a partner up on the hill that's advising you that it looks like this is about to come down this wave, and so you know how to handle yourself then, and so it's just a sense of being more deeply embedded in the world,
mm,
but with the world. And so, as a new form of listening, and listening to nature, listening to the world, and listening to your partnership, be it human or be it AI, and preferably both.
I think that's really exciting and hopeful, and I really hope that's where we go. AI as a learning amplifier, I think is a really, really wonderful construct, and the connections you were making it to some of these broader things we have in society like nature and human connection, I think are really, really fascinating. I'm curious, what role do you think young people need to play if we would want to realize this unexpected future where AI is a learning amplifier? It helps us harness this kind of collective tacit knowledge and intelligence.
Yeah, I think on top of that, there's a certain sense of how do you focus much more on reading context, not just content.
Hmm.
We've been taught how to read content. I read this book just right, and I am taught. Um, and it has very little to do with, oh, how do I really understand the shades of this context right now? And in today's age, you know, trust really comes from being able to read context um, and the willingness to explore comes from reading context and knowing how to do it safely. Um, and so there's a whole sense of how do you engage with the world more fully um, as kind of an ongoing set of living experiences um, that can be incredibly exciting, can be terrifying at times too, but learning how to read terrifying situations is not bad experience as well. Not everything is always pleasant. Not everything is always right. And so, there's a sense of understanding that we as humans are interacting with humans. We're interacting with AI to some extent, but we're also interacting with nature and animals. Um, and it's really kind of interesting to see how you start looking at nature a little bit differently. How is it learning from you? How are you learning it from it? And it's especially true with, pardon me, um, with pets as well, or animals more generally. Especially out in some of the places I've been in Africa, you really got to figure that out. um, and learning how to deal with a chimpanzee is a little bit different than dealing with a humanoid. So I mean, these experiences, broaden your ability to play with context. Um, so I think the push of Gen Z. Hold on a second. To live experiences smartly. The real question is, what makes it smart? What does it mean to live these things smartly? And that is, again, a social collaborative experience. Um, there's no textbook on that, at least not yet. but this is more kind of uh, living living in the experience itself. Um, and I think that takes you a long ways. And it's kind of exciting. So it's a little bit hard to get bored um, in today's age because you're being hit by something new almost every hour or so. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that's really standing out to me from what you just shared is that, and this has been a really consistent theme, I think, among folks ranging from, technologists to experts from the future of work to the young leaders that I've been speaking with, is in this conversation about AI's positive potential, it always cycles back to this focus on human connection and social connection. And what does it look like to start by building that foundation and then think about the ways that AI can amplify those connections or help us build things together. But yeah, just this core of we need to become better at fostering those connections and being able to explore and play and lead with curiosity. And so, yeah, I really, really appreciate you bringing that point up.
No, I think it's incredibly important. In fact, one of the major transformations I brought at Xerox PARC when I was directing it was kind of a switch toward looking at our game as social technical, not just technical.
Mm,
And if you play this situation as a social technical, you start to expand various dimensions of what makes it social, or sociological, and so on. And so suddenly you spend much more effort now reading books, magazines, journals on some of this softer science
mhm.
in order to actually handle the really hard situations that come up in terms of going back to reading context
Yeah.
and reading it correctly, reading it fast, and knowing how to leverage the moment to advance whatever your experiment really is.
I think that's so interesting because I'll share a little bit about reveal some of my inherent pessimism, but it's interesting because I think especially having grown up in the valley post when all of this stuff was kind of beginning to explode, I almost have this connotation with technological innovation being almost incompatible with social impact, social connection, things like that, or just almost adversarial. And so I think that view that you're sharing and the fact that it informed like a tech giant like Xerox PARC is so interesting.
And so critical. I mean, and
Yeah.
uh, because especially given that we don't have time to be taught, now how do you amplify the learning
Mm.
with trust and what builds trust. And now, but the trust comes from you,
Yeah.
okay, and your ability to read the context. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting how this game has now switched to me to being inherently as much social as technical.
You know, one thing I'll say that I've actually heard from I was talking with another Gen Z leader, and actually one thing that we'll do is we'll just kind of compare notes on what do you think are some of the big core kind of characteristics of our generation, and then one big one that they were sharing, and I would tend to agree, is just this kind of deep lack of trust in institutions. And one of the things they pointed to as forces pushing us in that direction specifically was our experiences with COVID of, just our schools were telling us you'll come right back. There was so much kind of confusion we were feeling from some of the other institutional forces at play, like the government and corporations and stuff. And so just, yeah, I wonder what it might look like to rebuild that trust, or for us to look harder at why the trust was broken, and what we then need to do in the aftermath of that.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that it's very hard sometimes to start to trust institutions because of that variability.
Mm,
Um, in 20 years building a company, that tends to get put in cement pretty soon. But in an interesting way, learning how to play with nature, nature is a hell of a lot easier to trust.
mm,
Um, and you start to kind of understand what are the forces that work here. And you start to kind of even appreciate how trees are learning from each other. I mean, how the hell is that possible? And I don't want to go into why that is more or less right, but it's complicated, or actually it's not complicated, it's complex. But yes,
mhm,
but yeah, but these are, so we're having to expand what we're trying to understand. Um, so we now have new players um, that context incorporates that requires us to be able to master it, to understand it, to expand our tacit learnings into that space as well, and so on.
mm.
So this is not a boring time.
Yeah, the one word I would definitely not use to describe the times we're living in, it would be boring. Yeah. So
No.
yeah, I mean, I'll also add, I have a specific affinity for nature and for trees in particular, and the way that they communicate with each other and the world and us. And so it makes me, I was just beaming when you mentioned trees specifically. Yeah. So I actually am I'm gonna have to run pretty soon. But I'm really, really, really glad that we got to connect.
Thank you.
I really
Likewise.
I come away from our conversations just with so much energy and hope, and yeah, I appreciate your time, and I can't wait to share what you've been sharing with me with the rest of our audience tomorrow.
Great. Okay. Thank you for taking the time. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, JSB. I hope you feel better and are getting lots of rest.
Yeah. I'm trying to. Okay. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye
Bye.
bye for now.